point we were making about 10 or 15 minutes ago, there's naturally a lot of politics around this story. How do we stop the boats? Who's going to stop the boats? We'll do it this way, we'll do it that way. Here's a Rwanda scheme. Here's Mark II Rwanda scheme. Look, goodness, we don't often, I certainly sense, we don't often talk about this side of things, even though there have been many tragedies. And some people, even if they feel very strongly about stopping those boats, I think we should all sympathise with somebody who loses their life and loses their life in this way in particular.
Yes, absolutely. And our team here at Care for Calais is absolutely devastated to have heard the news today. This is not, as you've mentioned, the first life that's been lost in the Channel. In fact, on the border in Calais this year alone, we know of 25 deaths, and that's 25 individuals, just like the person who's lost their life today, who had a family, who had friends, and was simply seeking a safe life. And that is a tragedy. Every single one of those deaths are a tragedy. Also, especially because these deaths are avoidable, and no one should have to lose their life simply seeking safety.
Yeah, I was reading some of the comments because Twitter and social media is obviously the most go-to reliable source of everything in the world. So, but just looking at some of the comments there today, even people who've got very, what you might call, fairly robust, more right-wing views on stopping boats, were displaying their sympathies for somebody losing their life, because this isn't what anybody wants to see. The fingers point at politicians. They point at politicians in France. They point at politicians in the UK. But I think most people would also agree, Imogen, that those people traffickers, the people responsible for these boats, there's no way you're meant to have that amount of people in a boat anyway. But surely the shouldering of blame would firstly go in that direction, one would have thought.
Well, I think the key thing for us is that we know that these deaths are avoidable because we could introduce safe passage for people seeking asylum. So when we talk about the small boats, 75% of the people who cross the Channel in these small boats are granted asylum in the UK. If we had a safe passage route for people to make those journeys, these deaths would not happen. People would not lose their lives, and people also wouldn't be living in the horrendous conditions that we see here in Calais, in France. And I think that ultimately the blame lies with everyone involved in this policy making, and that is making our hostile environment for asylum seekers, both in France and in the UK.
Is that, I mean, look, I don't want to get into picking things too much apart against the backdrop of somebody dying, and I think I would probably speak for both of us on that point. But is it not fair to say that, well, actually, if your life was in such horrendous danger, you wouldn't have jumped on a boat in the first place? It's not unrealistic that somebody would think that. It's also not unrealistic to suggest that even if you did have certain safe passages, many of those people wouldn't be taking them, and those that either don't or aren't granted asylum would still attempt this route anyway. So regardless of what you say, and I understand why you say it, Imogen, we're not going to stop it completely because these people traffickers aren't going away.
Well, I think the really key thing for us to look at is the situation in Ukraine. So in 2022, Ukrainians started leaving because of the war there. Some Ukrainians actually made it to Calais in the attempt to get to the UK, but not a single one of those people ended up on a boat in the Channel because they were offered a humanitarian visa under the Homes for Ukraine scheme. And I think that whilst we talk about large numbers of refugees crossing the Channel, it's really, really important that we remember these are very, very small numbers in the grand scheme of things. So for people who are worried about lots of people coming here, we really do have a very small number of people who actually try and attempt to cross the UK in the first place.
Well, I mean,
these are people
nearly 50,000 last year. That's not really a small number, is it?
But it is only 7% of all of the UK and EU asylum applications. So in the grand scheme of things, it is very small. And actually these people, the people that I meet on a daily basis that we support here, have connections to the UK. So they have friends and family who live there, for example. They speak English. And I think it's really important for us all to sit down, especially when something like this happens, and humanise the situation. The rhetoric around refugees and asylum seekers is so dehumanising, and that is directly responsible for what we've seen today. If we thought we had to leave our homes for whatever reason, that's conflict or persecution, we would go somewhere where we already had connections. And for some people, that is the UK. As someone from the UK, I'm proud to think of the UK as a safe and welcoming country for a number of asylum seekers who choose to live here. And I think that we really need talk about humans, to talk about their lives, and remember that these are individuals who faced incredibly awful and difficult journeys and difficult situations back home already.
James Price is with us also in the studio. I noted you shaking your head at some of what Imogen was saying there, James.
Look, I really resent this idea that that your viewers, that you, me, are not nice, caring, wonderful people if we think that there is some kind of problem here about accepting tens of thousands of people who are in a safe country that is France from coming over here. I'm afraid that organisations like this tend to be soft touches for these criminal gangs and helping facilitate some of the problems here, right? Again, we can't house all of the people who are coming over here legally. We can't house all of the people who are natural-born Brits of, however many generations back, because there's a massive housing crisis. So we're still letting more people in. The reason that's happening here, we're getting these kinds of deaths. And the only way that we can sort this is by fixing it much higher upstream, by getting rid of these kind of criminal gangs, by fixing some of the problems of some of these largely economic migrants. And when the lady there says that they've got lots of connections here, maybe it's because we've let so many people in recently. Again, this is France that they're coming from. It's a safe country.
Imogen, just give us a response to that. I mean, it is a safe country. I know you touched on the fact that there are connections to this country. It may well be that, as James could be right, because previous people that have come here. But do you sense in any way that Charities, whether yours or others, are directly or indirectly facilitating this?
That's a claim that I would absolutely refute. So we are an organisation that provides humanitarian support because there's a small number of people living here in Calais. They're living in horrendous conditions. They're very, very dangerous conditions, especially as we're getting into the winter now. These are people who are simply seeking asylum. Asylum is a basic human right. And to answer the fact of France takes many more asylum seekers than we take in the UK, so does Germany, and so does Italy. And it's a basic human right. People do not have to stay in that first safe country. And to say that organisations like ourselves are responsible for part of that is completely wrong. We are filling a gap that is not state-filled, and we are acting in a human way, providing a small part of dignity for people who lack any of that support.
In terms of the numbers here, and you mentioned that 75% are given status, they are accepted, that their claim is accepted. Even that area, as you well know, Imogen, is subject to scrutiny and complete disbelief in some respects, where people say, well, that's because it's almost impossible to disprove somebody's claim that they're either gay or they've become a Christian in a very conservative Muslim country, which doesn't go down particularly well. What is your response to that? That it's actually, despite what some people say, it's actually quite easy. If you come from a country where nobody can prove which country you've come from, you have no real proof of documentation. And the story that you're going to give to Border Force at this end, which is on its knees because there are so few of them seem to work there, is one that pretty much is, well, 75% of the time is going to work.
So what I would say from on the ground here in Calais is the people that we're supporting are from countries like Sudan, Syria, Afghanistan. We support a huge number of people who have fought with the British forces in Afghanistan. Their life is in danger. We know that their life is in danger from the Taliban government that's in place. And these are people who have escaped really, really terrible things. And we have an asylum system in the UK that is designed to check the reasons why people are leaving their country and to offer asylum for those who do really need it. So to say that people are coming here for no reason is completely wrong. And actually, my argument would be that, especially following the events of today, where someone has unfortunately lost their lives in what is a huge tragedy, no one chooses to get in a boat to cross the channel unless there is no other option for them.
But if you've got a better life, and I know some of this is anecdotal, I'm merely just putting this other side to you. You'll be familiar with all of these arguments, but we often get to see outside of hotels where many of these people end up in the United Kingdom, usually fairly fit, fighting fit, 23-year-old guys that are, seem to have a bit of a spring in their step. They're glad they got to where they wanted to go. It doesn't seem to chime with many people, the term, the most vulnerable people on earth. Now, I'm not suggesting you can make a gazillion accurate conclusions just by looking at a few guys having a smoke outside a hotel in Margate. But nonetheless, there is a picture that you kind of build and think it doesn't feel that, when we watched people leaving Sudan and Ethiopia in the past, we remember those remarkable bits of film footage, distressing footage of people escaping famine or tyranny in some kind of way. It doesn't seem to chime with that. What would your response be to people who are, maybe understandably, a little sceptical about that story?
I think the first thing to say is that the French media at the moment are reporting that the person who passed away in the channel this morning was in fact a woman. And I think that does go against this narrative that it is all young men who are here in Calais. That is absolutely not my experience. I think it's really also worth pointing out that the reasons that people leave the countries that they're from in the first place is often for different levels of persecution or due to the fact that they're caught up in a conflict, and conflict proportionally impacts men much more. And I think it's very important that we remember that. And talking about today, this is a woman who we believe has lost her life, a woman who was perhaps a mother, a sister, a friend. And it's really, really important that we do not let the dehumanising narrative take over from what is human lives and human issues.
James, you don't fully agree with that assessment?
Well, again, I wouldn't say that any of this is dehumanising, right? We said at the top of this hour that this is obviously a human tragedy, right? Every life is as sacred as every other. But when we're talking about this stuff on a big macro level, as you said, the vast majority of people coming over here are adult age men. Women and children are stuck in horrendous conditions in displaced people settlements all around the world. And for every adult age male that we have come over into this country on a small boat who could be back in that country finding work and whatever else, is one fewer place than we can have for a vulnerable woman or a child. Or for someone, as was mentioned there, from Afghanistan who helped our forces there, someone from Hong Kong fleeing the communist persecution there, someone in Ukraine. Right? We can't do everything, can't let the whole world in. So we should be much cleverer about this and not play into the hands of these evil criminal gangs who are exploiting these people coming over.